Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini, your host, as always, and I'm joined by the OnlyColors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey. Joe, how are you doing on this fine evening that we're recording?
Pretty good. Apparently a little better than you since I didn't watch any of that Michigan-Ohio State game.
Yeah, I guess I was talking before we started recording. Joe, you didn't watch the game there, the whole sideline camera for the whole Michigan-Ohio State game, which was just brutal on the eyes, just a visual chore. You got ref butt in your face the whole time, and I would like to think ESPN won't pull that out again, or at least make it like a secondary option, maybe on Watch ESPN. To have that be your whole main broadcast on your main channel was surprising, I think, and it was rough. So yeah, we got a little bit to talk about, maybe not as much as past weeks, but well, make sure you guys always check out theonlycolors.com for a lot of good stuff, especially as we get into the heat of basketball season as we get closer to March here. A lot of good stuff on the site there, as always, by a lot of good writers. And as always, you can follow on Twitter at theonlycolors. Joe is also at JOBIN, number 2 letter E, and I'm at Chris Vanini. So we're going to start off talking basketball. It's going to be pretty much what this whole podcast is. Only one game since we last spoke. It was an 88-69, what turned into a rout for the Spartans on Valentine's Day. Game that, MSU started off a little slow defensively. Both teams weren't very good, but second half, MSU really turned it on and pulled away by the end. Fourth straight game, at least 80 points for this MSU offense. It seems to really be in a flow on that side of the ball. They're up to number 3 in adjusted offensive efficiency on the year. But Joe, coming off the Indiana game, what would you take away from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly cliche at this point, considering the day that it was on, but Denzel Valentine was out of his mind. I think Matt Costello had a great game yet again. He's sort of quietly been doing that all season long, but, he was 10 for 12 from the field and chipped in 3 rebounds as well. And really, I mean, at this point, we got to talk about Matt Costello in terms of, is he a first-team All-Big Ten player? Or I think he's certainly a at least second-team All-Big Ten player, and sort of where he ranks among some of the best Izzo bigs at this point. I mean, I think he's pretty underrated at this point. But
he's actually, I think he was first-team All-Big Ten in KenPom as of yesterday. I think he was number 5. Which is a heck of a testament to really what he's done in Big Ten play. When Valentine went out, he became a real offensive option, and that has only continued since Valentine has come back. And to come off a career game like that against Indiana, and he's shown a little bit more of the outside shot that he's always had, but always been scared to death to use for fear that Izzo will blow up at him. But he's hit 2 threes in the last 2 games, and he's rebounding like crazy. And yeah, I mean, I think he's the best rebounder big man in the Big Ten in conference play based on the stats, or at least he's right up there. So yeah, I think first team Big Ten is without a doubt not out of the question. If you were going by position, him and Hammonds, I have to imagine, would be probably the top 2 big guys there. But yeah, I mean, Costello's right in that mix. He's once again, as is often the case with Izzo teams, the seniors are carrying the team. The seniors almost nearly outscored Indiana. They had 66 points, the 3 seniors of Valentine, Forbes, and Costello. And Indiana, if not for a late 3 at the very end, would have tied the MSU 3 seniors and Costello. Yeah, it's just been huge to get that inside presence to go with the guard play that they have. Is obviously they're hitting on all cylinders right now.
Yeah, I also was a little bit surprised that Troy Williams didn't have a better game for Indiana. He seems like kind of the guy that might give MSU fits to some degree, just given his length and athleticism.
I don't think he's done anything.
Right,
I don't think he's done anything against MSU in his career. If I'm looking up, I know I saw something that forgot where it was. It might have been Matt had pointed out that he's done almost nothing in his career against MSU. But yeah, you would think a guy like him, but just hasn't for some reason.
Right, and he seems like, especially with, and we'll talk about this in a second, I'm sure, with the Kenny Goins injury, that he's just the type of player that MSU would sort of match up poorly against, given his position and the fact that there's really nobody on the MSU roster that could, you would think, hang with him from an athleticism perspective. Yeah, it was that was pretty interesting to see Troy Williams have such a bad game.
Yeah, 20 minutes, 0 for 5 from the field, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 2 turnovers. Yeah, not much of a. You know who was a problem for MSU a little bit, and who I'd mentioned in the last podcast was Max Bielfeldt for Indiana. He went he scored 15 points, 10 rebounds, 4 offensive boards. It went 3 for 5 from deep. And the graduate transfer from Michigan. I think I said last week that if Bielfeld's gonna hit a 3, Izzo's gonna be pissed because he always hates when there's a big man who could shoot 3s and his big men don't guard it well enough. And there were a couple. Part of it was Bielfeld just played well on his own. So I mean, he's a guy who I understand why Michigan moved on based on everything that had happened up to that point. But he seems like a guy they could have really used this year with performances like that.
Right. I mean, and chipping in 10 rebounds to boot, right? He's a pretty useful player, I think, for them. And yeah, it seemed like they had sort of fallen asleep on the perimeter. The bigs did to some degree with Bielfeldt, and then they kind of figured it out as the game went along. But yeah, he was especially early. He had 10 points in the first, I'm going to misquote this probably, but it was like the first 5-6 minutes, I thought.
Yeah, something like that. So
he very quickly got into double-digit points.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned Kenny Goins goes down after McQuaid fell into his knee, taking a charge. When I watched it live, and even on the replay, it didn't look that bad to me. I mean, it didn't like some of the football injuries you see or something that are real bad. It just looked like a slight tweak, but I guess it's a minimum of 2 to 4 weeks for him, Izzo said, which I guess that means minimum of 2 weeks. But with the knee, but it appears not to be season ending, which is good for MSU because of what he has provided on the defensive side of the ball. And it's kind of weird. Who would have thought that, beginning of the year, come February, an injury to former walk-on Kenny Goins would be a hot topic, but he's been a very good defensive presence for them all season, really. And with what Costello is doing, scoring the ball, him and the two of them together, as MSU kind of mixes and matches the bigs, he's right in there with Davis, providing. What else they need? What do you think about them losing Goins?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about that is the now losing sort of the Goldilocks power forward that they had. He wasn't too big, wasn't too small, so he could sort of guard a number of opponent power forwards. So that's the trick now, I think, with the roster that Izzo's got, is that there isn't a guy like a Brandon Dawson or a Draymond Green who has the defensive versatility to guard the big men who might be playing the 4 or the stretchier 4s that sometimes you see in Big Ten play as well. So it'll be interesting. You saw Marvin Clark get 22 minutes in this game. He seemed to understand that he wasn't out there to be shooting 3s. There were a number of times where he had the ball free on the perimeter and didn't even look at the shot. And that, I think, was a positive for him, probably in Izzo's eyes. So I don't know if that's truly the best use of his abilities. You'd think that if you're going to be playing a guy who's a little bit smaller at the 4, you'd want to at least be threatening that type of shot. So I don't know. We'll see. It's one of those things, and I think you've seen it with Alvin Ellis to some degree as well, that once you get a little bit of playing time and sort of get in the flow of the game, things seem to slow down a little bit for certain guys. But what's really interesting, I mean, if you look at a minutes chart, and see what guys got minutes in what games, Javon Bess has really dropped off the map entirely. I mean, he started the first 10 games, and
right.
he has been virtually nowhere to be found. He didn't even play against Indiana.
Right. That's what I was going to say. You guys who could match up, and Bess is an inch shorter and 10 pounds lighter than Clark, but he just comes across as a bigger guy. I think he probably has a bigger wingspan. He comes across as that versatile Raymar Morgan type in terms of his build, and we talked about that before the year. But yeah, he's just completely fallen off. Part of it just simply the depth. We talked about in the non-conference that Izzo needed to tighten the rotation because playing a billion guys wasn't working, and Bess and Clark were part of the casualties. And on Clark, you like you said it with Ellis, I think part of it is he needs to get his confidence back. He was a guy last year, at times he'd come in and just no hesitation, boom, shooting threes, and would do stuff like that. I think he comes in, he hadn't played any meaningful minutes, I don't think, in a while. He comes in and kind of wants to make sure he plays his role first. I think what he finished with. Clark had 22 minutes, 2 for 3 from the floor. Didn't attempt a 3, 4 rebounds. So, yeah, he's not the player that Goins is. He's really more of an offensive threat. But I think if based on how he was playing, if defense is kind of the focus, what they want out of him when he gets in there, and that's going to be the first thing for any Izzo player. I think that's what they're looking for out of him.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, too, is you would expect Gavin Schilling probably to get some more run now against larger lineups.
He'd get more run if he would stop getting 2 fouls a minute into every time he gets in the game. That's the other problem.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
What's his foul? Let me look up his foul rate this year. It's fouls committed for 7.5. 7.5 on the year, which is, let's see how it compares. So 7.5. A year ago, he was at Schilling 7.0. So it's even higher than it was. This has always been a problem with him. Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how Izzo ends up juggling, I would say, Marvin Clark, Gavin Schilling, and then also Wallenman, who played some pretty significant minutes last year in crunch time lineups. I mean, I remember him against Purdue last year guarding Isaac Haas in crunch time, which was a pretty entertaining thing to watch. But Wallenman could definitely see an uptick in minutes at this point as well if Marvin Clark doesn't continue to sort of understand his role in the way that I think Izzo wants him to, and if Gavin Schilling can't get away from fouling. So that's going to be, has continued to be a really interesting thing to watch as the season has gone along. I think minutes at the power forward spot have been a real problem, unless, in crunch time, they've figured out that playing Costello and Deonte Davis together works pretty well. So that's been sort of figured out, but the backup minutes at the power forward spot are going to be a kind of a strange thing for Izzo to figure out. I think Izzo would call it a strange bag of nuts.
Well, one thing with Wallenman is he's got to cut down on the turnovers when he gets in the game. He seems to be he hasn't played a ton, but his turnover rate is already 10% higher than it was a year ago, up to 35%. Anytime the ball touches him, the offensive side of the ball, it's either it hasn't often ended well like it did at times last year. So yeah, I mean, it's going to, like I said, they're going to kind of have to probably open up the lineup again a little bit more on the inside. The last couple of games, Izzo's done it a little bit more. He's thrown Alvin Ellis in there. When Goins went out, he got Clark in there. So, and Nairn came in at the end. We can talk about that in a minute. But yeah, this is kind of what playing so many guys in the non-conference does. It theoretically gets them ready for if they're needed this time of year, and a couple of those guys are going to be needed. So yeah, Lou Rawls Nairn. I actually didn't even catch it. I was kind of not totally paying attention at the end, but he did get in for a few minutes at the end. That would appear to be good for them going forward. I don't think he's in a spot where he's going to start, and I don't know if Izzo would. Well, here's my question: if he's back, I mean, do you start him? What's your role for him?
Well, I would think that the way you would play Tum Tum is just when Valentine isn't in the game, right? So sort of a guy who can bring the ball up and initiate without Denzel in the game. Just given that I think Aaron Harris has still struggled a little bit. I think he was a little smarter against Indiana than he had been in against Purdue, especially, but in a few games as well. So to me, that seems like where Tum Tum could be useful, sort of in a distributing / leadership role when Valentine is on the court. That's my thought,
Right.
but I don't know. That's could go a number of ways. It doesn't seem like bringing the ball up the court is necessarily an issue. McQuaid can do that to some degree. Forbes can do that to some degree. Aaron Harris can do that to some degree. But
Yeah,
that's the way I'd probably end up using him.
I don't know. I think I'd have him in there when you want Valentine off the ball because you by taking out Valentine for Nairn, you're taking out your best offensive weapon to put in, best scoring threat to put in like a non-existent scoring threat. I think you pair Nairn with Valentine when he's off the ball more, and then you can obviously throw McQuaid in there, who's done a decent job at the point spot. Every game he makes a few really nice passes, but from a pure run in the offense, dribbling the ball around point, he still looks a little uncomfortable with that because obviously he came here to shoot. He came to MSU to shoot to be a shooting guard. So losing Goins obviously hurts them, but I think getting Nairn back is big, especially as you get into this stretch here when you're going to need to keep Valentine rested for the time when you get into March, and especially with the games coming up here. They got it's a Wisconsin long schedule I'm looking at. But you got Wisconsin, you got another 5-day break. Ohio State, 4 or 5 day break. So they got a little bit of break time here, but yeah, I put in Nairn with Valentine, not without him, because then I think you're really hampering the offense. But that's my take.
It's still tough either way. You have to be able to take Valentine out for a few minutes a game at least.
Right.
So there's, I don't know if you don't have either one of them in the game now. You have McQuaid bringing up the ball, or maybe Aaron Harris doing that, and those have some disadvantages as well. So it's a tough thing. You almost just want to wait and see Nairn be full go instead of playing spot minutes where he wouldn't be 100% anyways. But
yeah, we've talked about, since he's been out, the offense is, like I said, really, kind of blown up. They scored at least 70 in every game since the win at Minnesota. They've scored at least 70, 79, 92. Oh, no, my bad. They scored 59 at home against Iowa. But after that, 76 Wisconsin, 71 Nebraska, 74, 76, 96, 89, 80, 81, 88. So, the number 3 offense, they're shooting the lights out from 3-point range. And, that when Nairn comes in, he doesn't give you that offensive threat. When you've got Harris and you've got Valentine, you've got McQuaid, Forbes, you got all these guys who can shoot from deep, and that's been a big part of the offense this year.
Well, and you wonder too, with Goins going out, so the two, I would say, most offensively limited but still rotational players are Goins and Tum Tum, right? Both those guys are low usage, not particularly good shooters. Goins has shown flashes, but neither one of them is able to create their own shot or be much of a threat to shoot the ball. Now, if they're both out, now you might end up with an offense that is particularly efficient, because if you are rolling out a 5 of Valentine, Costello, Forbes, Harris, and say Marvin Clark, now all 5 of those guys can shoot the 3.
Yeah,
and they're all pretty good at distributing the ball. I think Marvin Clark would be the worst in that particular configuration, but in any case, there's a lot of shooting on the floor at that point, and that could be really awesome from an offensive perspective. Now, defensively, it might not be quite as good. So it's I do think that there's a role for Tum Tum and for Goins to be playing, but you might actually see an especially efficient offense with the two of them being limited or out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the as I look at the MSU, the Ken Palm numbers on offense. They're just fascinating to see. I mean, MSU's number 4 in 3-point shooting, but they only, they're 180th in taking 3-pointers, and they don't get to the free throw line at all. But part of the reason is because they by far lead the country in assists per field goal made. So a lot of their shots are good looks. They're not guys wildly driving, looking to pick up a foul. Just about the only time anybody ever gets fouled is when a big man is posting up. Pretty much. Forbes doesn't get to the line. No, the guards don't really get to the line. Looking at the free throw rates here.
Or when jump shooters get fouled, that is pretty rare as well. But that happens.
Right. I mean, Forbes is 22. Davis and Deontay Davis on 20, but Valentine 20%. Costello is up to 38%, and Aaron Harris is at 36% because he's the one guy who does drive to the hoop and try to do something. Sometimes.
And those percentages you're talking about are free throw rates, yeah.
Right. You're right. The amount that they're, their ability to get to the line. And Harris is about the only guy who's really, Valentine's doing it from time to time, but he's very controlled in what he's doing. But yeah, it's just been really fascinating to watch this MSU offense this year because, like we said, they have so many guys who can shoot. They're so good at passing to each other. It's just, and they're hitting all these 3-pointers, but a lot of these are wide open. The Michigan game, the Indiana game, a lot of these shots are just wide open offensively. They're just really hitting on all cylinders here. And as Costello becomes more and more of a threat inside, that's only going to help them. And defensively, I read Luke Wynn from Sports Illustrated put together his Magic 8 or something. Picking 8 teams that can win the championship, and MSU was in that group, and I think he mentioned some lines of MSU's offense is so good it can make up for its it's maybe a little adequate defense relative to teams' pass, and we've talked about that before, and it's true in the sense that they're 27th in adjusted defensive efficiency. However, they're third in effective field goal percentage defense. Teams are not shooting the ball against them. The problem is that MSU, they've gotten better at it, but they had been fouling guys forever. And that actually they've really cut down on that. They're down to 104 nationally in opponent free throw rate. That was way higher, especially in the non-conference. They really cut down on the fouling, and they don't force turnovers at all. They're almost dead last in the country in that. But I think defensively, it's kind of weird for an Israel team. I think this team is a little bit better defensively than they've been maybe given credit for. And the Purdue game, Rafael Davis just went off, and sometimes that just happens. And some of those are wide open, but that's a guy who's something like a 30-something% shooter for his career. For the year, goes off from 3, and they get up to 82 points in overtime too. So I think MSU's defense is actually a little bit better than they've been getting credit for too. What do you think of that side of the ball?
Well, I think that the Purdue performance is probably a lot better in hindsight than we gave it credit for at the time too. I mean, traveling to West Lafayette and taking them into overtime and really having a game that should have been a win on their floor, even considering that Rafael Davis was out of his mind shooting from 3, is a very positive sign, I think, going forward, despite the fact that it was a loss. Defensively, yeah, it's the logical extreme of a Tom Izzo defensive style. It's extremely passive in some ways, but causes opponents to have to take a lot of difficult shots, and part of that probably is the shortened shot clock. For as long as Ken Palm's tracked it, MSU has been one of the best in terms of forcing opponents to take very long possessions, right? So in terms of opponent possession length, MSU rates quite highly. And so
nearly to the top. They're 344th out of 350 something teams, so they're right there.
Right, and and that's sort of inverted, right? So if you were a faster team, if teams were shooting more quickly against you, they would be higher. But what that suggests to me is that the shot clock actually has had probably a positive impact for MSU defensively, because they kind of settle in and force teams to take some bad shots. Now, I don't know if that seems to me to be a high variance strategy, right? If you're you end up with a guy like Rafael Davis going 6 for 8 from 3 and you lose a game like that game at Purdue. Whereas if you were turning teams over pretty consistently, if you had a pretty high turnover percentage, but or just a sort of a more even distribution of the 4 factors defense, you might be able to more consistently shut teams down. That could end up biting MSU in the tournament, right? If they have run into a team that shoots the ball pretty well from outside or just on first shots, shoots the ball pretty well, and they're not turning that team over, then there's a decent chance that MSU could lose a game that maybe it shouldn't in the tournament. That's my major concern, especially because I think that this team is going to be defined largely by the way that it performs in both the Big Ten and conference and NCAA tournaments, given that there's virtually no shot of MSU securing even a share of the Big Ten title in the regular season at this point. So That's my concern, is just that you get into the tournament where MSU should be a pretty high seed and you run into a hot shooting team. Now all of a sudden your advantages on defense in terms of effective field goal percentage aren't there, and you're not doing some other pieces well enough to counteract that lost advantage, and now maybe you just have to outscore a team. So MSU definitely has the opportunity to do something like that as well. But yeah, that's my major concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's variance with the other end of the spectrum too. Like VCU, West Virginia teams in the past with their heavy pressing. If you got a team that can break the press, and that if you get the half, they're not very good in the half court D, and MSU's, they've been good in the half court D, and but like I said, it's a logical extreme of an Izzo team, and historically Izzo teams have been pretty good. So I think I think that's exactly. Obviously, I think they would want more turnovers, but at the same time, outside of when they had Brandon Dawson kind of doing that, it's never really been their gig. But the fact that they've really cut down on how much they're fouling or not fouling or whatever, I think has been big. You look at adjustments. Indiana shot, I think, like 30% in the second half, and that's one of the best offensive teams in the conference. Yeah, I mean, I guess you're always susceptible to maybe a hot shooting team, but I just think this defense has been, it's interesting. Again, look at numbers: 27th in adjusted efficiency, but 6th in 3-point shooting per defense, which I know is not really a thing, but 6th in 2-pointers, 26th in blocks. They've been really, really good on D, and they're getting a lot of credit for everything they're doing offensively. I just think the defense has been it's been pretty good. So Wisconsin now. Last time MSU played them, had the game in hand, led by 4 late in the final seconds, gave up a 3, turned the ball over, gave up a bucket, lost the game. Heading into this game, Wisconsin, I think both teams are a lot different. Wisconsin comes in on a 7-game winning streak, really got things rolling under Greg Garth, kind of got it figured out. They beat Maryland recently. And when you look at the Wisconsin team, Joe, what do you see?
Well, there's a lot of interesting things about that Wisconsin team. And I think probably the most interesting thing is that, so for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with the way that KenPom's pages are set up, at the bottom of every team page, it has a sort of a minutes distribution for each position. So point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. And KenPom's got an algorithm where based on a player's stats, they get sorted into being a small forward, a power forward, a center, and so forth. His algorithm actually calls Nigel Hayes their point guard, which is so incredibly broken. But the reason for that is because Wisconsin has a very low assists per field goal made percentage, which is kind of interesting. And they've got a number of guys who are sort of creating for themselves, but not necessarily for others. So they have their assists leader, or at least their leader in terms of assist percentage, is Nigel Hayes, which is pretty wild for a Big Ten team that has some strong guards. I mean, Bronson Koenig and Zach Showalter are both very good guards. So you would expect that not to necessarily be the case. So they're sort of an interesting team stylistically on offense from that perspective. And the other thing is that Ethan Happ, who was not necessarily a particularly heralded recruit, has really burst onto the scene and obviously hit the game winner against MSU in that first game, and has a really high usage rate, especially for a freshman, and has sort of allowed them to be the team that they've been. Without him, I don't know that they would be nearly as effective defensively as they've been able to be over this last stretch. So those are sort of the biggest things.
That's a good point on the not assisting on field goals. They're normally looking at stuff. They're usually about top 200, usually higher 100. They're usually a little bit better, but this year they're 253, and they don't take nearly as many 3-pointers as they used to. They were typically in the top. Looking at the past 6 years or so, they were usually about top 50 in 3-pointers per shot attempt. They take a lot of threes. This year they're 253rd. So yeah, it's a lot of guys creating on their own more than what they've done in the past. And Nigel Hayes, man, that guy is he's killed MSU in his career. And yeah, I know they've introduced a little bit more of the swing kind of back into things. They seem to really be just on a roll. Kind of, they know what they are now. This isn't the same team that lost to Western Illinois, lost to Milwaukee, lost to Marquette early in the year. But still, I mean, KenPom gives MSU 84% shot of winning. MSU is actually the highest ranked Big Ten team in the conference at number 3 overall, slightly ahead of Iowa. I wouldn't take MSU head to head against Iowa, but that's always interesting, especially when you got a Wisconsin team that's typically the benefit of rankings. Yeah. So what?
So the other thing about
what's up?
The other thing about Wisconsin that's pretty interesting is that they have an extremely thin bench. They are, in terms of bench minutes, they are 348th in the country. They don't play many guys. They have their starting 5 and then 2 other guys who have more than 30% of minutes played. So their bench is really thin, and so it's sort of the Nigel Hayes, Ethan Happ, and Bronson Koenig show to a large degree. I mean, those guys are taking a vast majority of the shots in sum for this team.
Yeah, it's like an old Thad Matta team where he was pretty much 5 guys and not much else. Yeah, I mean, not much to really. I mean, it's not much. I know Bo Ryan's not coaching, but it's a Wisconsin team. You kind of know what you get from them. I'm kind of surprised KenPom has MSU so heavily favored in this game, especially. I know it doesn't take into account, but Wisconsin's really been on a roll recently. So, what's your pick for the game?
I think that MSU wins pretty comfortably for a couple reasons. I think, number one, that from the intangibles perspective, I think that MSU's players are going to be pretty upset about the loss in Madison, just the way that it happened and the fact that Wisconsin had 7 more free throws made than field goals made. And I think that they come out pretty fired up. And the other thing is, I just, playing at home, I can't imagine that Wisconsin's going to get the number of calls that they got in the Kohl Center. So those things make me feel like it's going to be an MSU comfortable win. Plus just the fact that MSU, despite the loss to Purdue, I think has played quite well ever since the loss to Nebraska, which was sort of the second loss that MSU got dealt by Wisconsin, right? I think MSU has been beaten by Wisconsin twice this year, in that they lost once in Madison, and then I think there was an overreaction to the new rules changes, and that let Siobhan Shields have a huge game against MSU in East Lansing. And so I think that they're not going to let Wisconsin beat them a third time. So let's say I said MSU 75, Wisconsin 60.
It's MSU Wisconsin games are just always ugly. I never really know how the fouls are going to be called. MSU's, like I said, gotten a lot better at not fouling, and I think we're going to have to see how much better they've gotten at not fouling against against Wisconsin. I think it'll be close. I think MSU wins, within a 5-point range. I think it'll be close. I think both teams are kind of got all things clicking. Both teams are feeling good. And this is a big game for the Big Ten standings because with Michigan's loss, now Purdue jumps up. Purdue won 2, so Purdue jumped up to 4th place at 9-5. Michigan's also 9-5. MSU is 8-5. Wisconsin's 8-4. So a win by MSU would jump them up ahead of Wisconsin and put them tied with Purdue for the last double bye spot. And there's a whole lot of from Michigan, Wisconsin, MSU, Purdue, Ohio State, all clunked right there in the middle. It could be the difference between playing on the Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament or getting the double bye. And MSU's got the favorable schedule to finish with Wisconsin at home, then Ohio State, Penn State, Rutgers, Ohio State. So they could really, run up the standings here to try to get that double bye if they finish strong like we expect, like we figure they're going to. So, but I think Wisconsin will be a tough, close one just because it seems to always be that. And with the fouls and we'll see. So
no score prediction from you?
Oh, well, I said within 5. I guess I'll go 75-70.
Sure, that's high scoring for MSU Wisconsin.
Yeah, but I think
it's actually that would be lower scoring than the first game of the year. So
yeah, that's true too. Whatever. Picking basketball is even harder than picking football, but yeah. So
yeah, that's true.
Is there anything else? Not a ton to talk about. Just with one game in the back, and then I guess what they got? They also have Ohio State next Tuesday. So I guess we'll probably record after that, either next Tuesday or Wednesday. So thoughts on Ohio State? They're coming off by far their best offensive performance of the year, pretty much against a Michigan team that hasn't put up much of a fight defensively. But they're whatever. What do you think?
They're a really young team, and so you would kind of expect them to improve over the course of the year as their sort of experience deficit decreases. Because at this point, they're freshmen who didn't have any experience before the year, have nearly a full year of experience at this point, and they're going to be hungry. I mean, they have a real shot now at making the tournament. That win over Michigan for them, I think, was particularly big, but they could use, they have a win against Kentucky, which was helpful, but then they got some bad losses. So Spartan Dan had them at BubbleCon 2, which means that they're not quite on the bubble. They need, some sort of surprising outcomes to end up making the tournament. And I think that they've got those opportunities at this point. They get both us and Iowa at home between now and the end of the regular season. So that game could be pretty interesting for a number of reasons. And I think that Ohio State's going to be pretty fired up. And I mean, I think weirdly enough, I think this happened with Iowa to some degree, but I think that there was a little fan carryover from football season to some degree as well. I know it's by the time that game actually is played, it'll be 3 months since the Ohio State Michigan State football game. But I do think that their fans will be pretty riled up for that one as well. So I'm actually a lot more concerned for that Ohio State game on the road than I am for the Wisconsin game in the Breslin Center.
I guess you could say that they don't give a damn for the whole state of Michigan based on how things are going. But it's a very Thad Matta team. 251st in bench minutes. Not a ton of guys play. They're very young. They're not great offensively. Not really good at much of anything. They're pretty good defensively. I actually think MSU will have a better chance against the Buckeyes on the road than they will at home against Wisconsin. But that's me. That's the opposite of what Ken Palm says, although not by a ton. But that one he has MSU winning by 5. So But yeah, good. It should be two slugfests though. Two pretty good defensive teams over the next two games, and
and also I think that the MSU OSU basketball rivalry is just generally underrated. I mean, going back to 2011, 2012, there have been some very, very good games between these two teams.
Going into last year, I think Izzo and Mata, like all time against each other, the teams were even in record and even in points scored, or like just about. It was as even as you could get before MSU last year won. Did they beat them twice last year? Yeah, no, they beat them at a neutral site as well as at home. So they haven't played at Ohio State in a couple years. But these teams usually always play close games except for the last Big Ten game. I mean, even last year's game at Breslin was a 3-point game. So maybe I'm wrong. Just about every MSU Ohio State game does come down to the wire. But for some reason, I'm feeling MSU is strong. Wisconsin will be more of a battle than Ohio State to me, which means it'll probably be the other way around. So,
well, at least you're confident about your opinions on this one.
So you got anything else you want to hit? Oh, actually, football. I put together the spring game lists of every single team, just about every single team. Spring game date as well as the date that spring practice starts. MSU starts on March 22nd. Spring game will be April 23rd. So mark that on your calendars, everybody, if you care. And also, you can see the whole list at coachingsearch.com. Put it up there. So, anything else you want to hit?
No, that's all I got.
All right. Well, we pulled together a decent amount of stuff for not much to talk about in this podcast, but appreciate everybody for listening. Next week should have a lot more to talk about, definitely. So, yeah, thanks for listening, and as always, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Let us know what's good and bad, and so we'll talk to you guys next week. See you.
Thanks.